except, whoa, is that too loud? Loud. Everything except for the crostini is gluten-free. Yes. I did make the cake. The cake wasn't possible, but I'm going to show you almost in real time how to do everything. So, when I get started, or when you get started, how many of you cook, bake? Cook, bake. Yeah, vegans do that. They get in the kitchen and do things. To me, one of the most important things is the mise en place, meaning getting everything together that you need. If the nuts need to be roasted and cooled, that has to happen. If the milk has to be warm, if the chocolate has to be chopped, that all has to happen. If a recipe says, the cake says, I need 1/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, and I don't have 1/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, I'm going to leave it out. If I don't have 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, I'm not going to make the cake because I need that for the cake. So kind of have a very big mise en place here, and I'm a talker. Some of you who've already met me are very aware of that. I also hate winter and I hate the time change, but I'm just going to be happy with all this chocolate here and show you a bunch of stuff and get going. The first thing I'm going to make is the ganache, and you have a recipe for the ganache. It is so versatile. If you learn to make one thing, make this ganache. You have truffles, you have a cake glaze, you have crostini, you have chocolate milk, you have chocolate vodka, you have malted, everything you can possibly think of. And I've made it in a few. What ganache is it's typically an emulsion of heavy cream, which we don't use, and a particular percentage of chocolate in varying proportions depending on what you're using it for. It's very easy to make. It's like a 2-3 ingredient thing, and it takes absolutely no time at all, but there are some rules to follow, and if anybody has seen my cookbook trailer, somehow I go, rules, Fran's rules, because I want everything to turn out right for you. So the first thing I'm going to do, if I can remember how to do this, is I have, can you see, you can see, right?
Yes.
Almond milk, heating. And it's almond milk because that's my preference. I like the taste of almond milk, but you can do any of these recipes you can use soy milk if you want. When I'm doing for a big group, I assume a couple of things. I assume soy avoiders. I'm not making judgments. I eat soy. I assume soy avoiders, and I assume that people are allergic to nuts. So what I have found works really well is coconut milk beverage. So that is different from canned coconut milk or coconut cream, but you've probably seen it. It comes in a container like this, and there's no change. It's 1 for 1. However much almond milk you're using, you use coconut milk. So you want to get the milk heating with a little bit of sugar, and I use a little bit of olive oil. This is very, very versatile. Anybody here familiar with Rip Esselstyn, the vegan fire? Okay, I made his wedding cakes. You know that I didn't use oil. I have a recipe in my beef with meat, which, by the way, that cookbook is about to be renamed for some reason. Well, because probably people don't realize that my beef with meat is a cookbook. And then I don't use the oil, but I find that a little bit of oil I want this to come up, gives this nice gloss. What is absolutely crucial, there are a couple of really crucial things, and then you just do it, is the chocolate that you use. You need a chocolate that tastes good to you. And we all have different palates. I know this from teaching. Over here, group 1 says that was delicious, but the chocolate was too dark. Over here, group 2 says that was delicious, but the chocolate was too sweet. You would think that a 70% chocolate would taste, across the brands pretty similar, but they don't. People have proprietary methods for roasting the beans, where the beans come from, and so on. So you have to do a little homework if you want to make chocolate desserts and do a little tasting. That's what you need to do. Then you need to chop the chocolate very finely, and I'm going to show you how to chop chocolate afterwards. So the right chocolate, again, the right chocolate to use is the one that tastes good to you right out of the package. However, you need to stay within the percentages listed in the recipe. If the recipe says 70 to 72% chocolate and you use a 56, you're going to have a fail. And if you use, this is interesting, it was working all morning. I think I used 10 pounds of chocolate this morning. Someone had to. Okay. I really recommend that you get yourself, I brought this from home with me, a little, this is under $30, an electronic scale. It makes, I mean, you know, if Theo is a brand I like, you can go, okay, 3, 6, and so on. But I like to chop, I like to do things ahead to the extent that I can. So I grind my sugar before I make cakes. I chop a whole bunch of chocolate, I put it in a bag, and I write 8 ounces, 72%, and the brand. And it's a real time saver. So what I want is 8 ounces. And this will tell me in ounces, I guess that's American style, and also in gram weight. And my book was done for international. It's now available in a German edition and a French edition, and Italian is coming. And doing the gram weight as an American was really difficult for the book, but I love it. You just keep zeroing this scale out, and you can make things in one bowl. And it's really precise. So now I have 8 ounces of chocolate. Somehow this hasn't come to a boil, so I'm going to really crank it up. I was told that this burner has to be right in the middle. Right in the middle. Now, what I have over here is when I'm doing anything, that's what my grandma would say, do as I say, not as I do. You never really want to have chocolate, a bowl of chocolate, sitting anywhere near water. So, if I had a different size pot, I would say something like this. Whoops, now it's coming to a boil. This is my I Love Lucy. Okay, so pretend it's a saucepan. You have just this much water in there. You bring it up to a boil, turn it off. You don't want the chocolate in the water. This chocolate is already melted, so I'm keeping it in some warm water. So I always have, like, that's a double boiler in a way. It's a bain-marie. I always have that available because, boy, these induction burners come up really fast. Now, you saw that was boiling very furiously. If I poured that over this chocolate now, it would be too hot. Has anybody ever had, you see, you making a chocolate sauce or a chocolate ganache and it's nice and shiny, as I'm going to show you, and then a minute later there's like an oil slick and it's doing, has that ever happened to you? Well, it's happened to me when I've been impatient. The cocoa butter, chocolate has fat in it, good fat. It's supposed to be really healthy, so, and happy making. I think I'm happy and I'm healthy. Well, we don't want the cocoa butter, which is not dairy, to separate out from the chocolate. So I have to have, the ideal is to have the liquid, and most often it's a non-dairy or a plant milk, but I do a chocolate tahini truffle with orange juice. So the liquid that's going to melt the chocolate, you need it really hot, but not too hot. And this is my really scientific way of knowing if it's too hot. If it's too hot for the baby but hasn't taken my skin off, I'm okay. The next thing to remember is that you have to pour whatever liquid you've heated over the chocolate all at once. If you trickle it in, who's had chocolate seeds? It gets, crunchy and stuff. You can kind of fix it sometimes, but who wants to bother? So all at once, swirl the bowl, leave it alone, and then, again, it's interesting to be a pastry chef who's a little impatient, but I think this is my Prozac, as I have to pay attention. You cover up the chocolate for about 4 minutes, and I want to do everything. I want the most luxurious result. I don't want anybody saying, that's pretty good for vegan, which leads me to saying that unless I'm with a vegan group, I don't ever say, try this vegan dessert. In the beginning, I was so, astonished coming from the other side, the cream butter egg sugar kitchen to this side. I used to go, oh my God, you have to try this. You won't believe what's not in it. And it sets people up. They go, even if they liked it, they think they don't. I once put the same cake, the cake on the cover of my book, The Chocolate Cake to Live For, on 2 different plates, and I said, one's vegan, one isn't, and people had opinions. Now, I'm getting as many calls from people who they had no idea that they ate a vegan cake, and that's the way that it should be. But you can't throw out the rules. You have to measure, you have to use quality ingredients, you can't mess around with the percentages. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to show you, for example, I was going to do the cake today, the chocolate cake to live for. These are 2 different kinds of cocoa powder. Some of you may know this is a non-alkalized or a natural cocoa. You can see that it's light in color. And this is a Dutch processed cocoa. They are not interchangeable. If you use one for the other in a batter-based dessert, you're going to have a disaster. The writer should tell you which to use. The recipe shouldn't just say 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, but sometimes they do. So cocoa powder is really the low-fat baker's secret to making delicious desserts, because it's after the chocolate, chocolate's a bean, that's the good news. So after the chocolate is fermented, and the cocoa mass, which is just the unsweetened chocolate, most of the fat, the cocoa butter, is extracted out. And what's left, and then, you can buy, I use cocoa butter to make white chocolate, for example, vegan white chocolate. White chocolate almost always has milk in it, if you didn't know that. I don't even think of it as chocolate, but sometimes it has a use. So what's left is this kind of defatted cocoa or chocolate. Typically it's 10 to 12% fat. It can be up to 22% fat, but they're not interchangeable. In cocoa, yes, whatever is your choice. But if a recipe says flour, baking soda, and cocoa, the baking soda means natural cocoa powder. If it says baking powder and baking soda, then you use the Dutch process. So that's a pretty important thing to know. Now, I would say that 4 minutes is up, and the next step is to whisk this. Not too vigorously, because I want to avoid air bubbles. Depends. And you stir from the center out, and I can see that this is a bit thicker than I expect. It will make a nice truffle. Can you see that? Now, if this didn't melt all the way, I've got my water bath ready. I would just put it in the water. I'd rather have that than have a situation where it's so hot that I go, oh wow, that's really beautiful, look how glossy it is, and 30 seconds later I've got an oil slick going around. I like to add, and I'm very precise about measuring, I really am, in the real world, a little olive oil, a little salt, a little vanilla. Here I use fine salt. On something that you're tasting, we used crunchy salt. And then the very last important step is to do a test. So sometimes I just dip a spoon in, that's all. Put it in the refrigerator for about 10 minutes, because I don't want to wait until I'm ready to make the truffles or ready to glaze the cake or whatever else I'm doing to find out that this truffle ganache is too thick for what I intended for or too thin. So what I would do what would I do if it was too thick? Somebody knows. I'd add more liquid. And if it's too thin, I have some chocolate melted and I would stir it in. Once it's nice and shiny like this, you leave it alone. If you keep whisking, you go, that's really pretty. This is really nice looking ganache. And you see it's nice and shiny. This was made with a 74% chocolate. So this is going to, what you're tasting is going to taste pretty dark to you, but that's what the kitchen had. If I keep stirring it now, it will get grainy. If you've made it and it hasn't separated and it's the right consistency, but it's a little bit gritty, and occasionally that happens if you haven't waited long enough or who knows what, just put it in the water again and remelt it. So I always have this around. I just always have ganache in my fridge and in my freezer because it will set up. Then you put it over a water bath and you have it, and it will last in your fridge for a week or two, and it will last in your freezer for a really long time. So you don't feel like making I have hot fudge sauce in there, I have all kinds of sauces. Just pour this over ice cream. It's just great. I want to show you while we're waiting for the test. Would you remind me to look at the test in 5 minutes? Thank you. Okay, so I made this earlier. The same ganache, which I think is going to be too thick. I think it's going to need a little thinning. And I've poured a double recipe into a quarter sheet pan without parchment, just right into the pan, and let it sit at room temperature for a little bit. And then I scored it because I'll tell you, you're tasting truffles that are kind of round, but not perfectly round. I have a thing against those perfectly round Godiva truffles. To me, maybe it's Italy, the Tartufo. I want them to look like truffles. So you just take pieces however big or little you want them. I like dessert, but I like smaller portions. So sometimes people will go, look, I just had one. I'm like, really? I think you had a golf ball. I think that's for 4 people. So I like one, small one, just kind of pushed together. When I'm doing something for a lot of people, and I just have had it, I don't feel like making 150 truffles, they're set up like this. Well, what's wrong with a square truffle? Nothing. Nothing's wrong with them. And then you can either enrobe them in melted chocolate, which if I can get a fork, I'll do, or you take a little cocoa powder, that's water, and if you hadn't had the time to infuse your plant milk with curry powder or chili to make the Aztec truffles or the ginger truffles or the curry, you can just put some flavoring in the cocoa powder and use a good quality. You're going to taste what you're going to put in. Put a little ginger powder in, put a little salt in, and the first taste that people will get is that I happen to like ginger, so I'm being not too gingerly with the ginger here. And you can roll your truffles in shredded, in coconut, in cacao nibs. I love cacao nibs, in all kinds of things. Oftentimes I'll have them just in the freezer like this, or just before I'm ready to go, and I don't always dust them until pretty close to serving time, just because. I don't want too much. If you get too much cocoa powder on here, take a sip and just shake it off. But there you go. And you can hit this with a little bit of ginger powder. If it's a ginger thing, I don't mind having the cocoa powder on the plate, but I'll tell you this, when I was working, anybody here know Angelica Kitchen in New York City? So I was a pastry chef there, and when I was doing my vegan baklava, I had an idea, well, I think a garnish should be something that's in whatever the dessert is. So I put like a little bit of cinnamon. Thank you, sir, you heard me. Chef Robert's amazing. So I put a little cinnamon on the plate, and the plates kept coming back, and the servers were saying, everybody thinks they're dirty. So if you're gonna do it, do it. That's what I have to say about that. Not just a little bit. Okay, so here's a truffle, and now, since I have a fork, I can enrobe one. Now what I want to do is, you see me walk away very gingerly, because that little bit of water getting into the chocolate at this point can make a problem. So let's take this guy. You can get yourself some really nice, fancy chocolate dipping forks and things. It's kind of fun. Or you can just use a fork. And just plop it off. And the idea is to get a really thin shell. But it's amazing. You know, it's kind of a very relaxing thing to do. And oftentimes when I'm serving a plate, I do what I call the Picasso effect because I have melted chocolate around. No need for pastry bags. Don't be ridiculous. Something like this. And I'm going to let this get cold, and then I'm going to hit it with a little gold luster dust. I also will take a paper cornet or a little pastry bag and write happy birthday. Whose birthday? Anybody got a birthday here? Brian? Happy birthday, Brian. And you put that in the fridge, or a happy anniversary, and people go, oh my God. And it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. So,
5 minutes up. 5-minute test. You test in the fridge.
Yeah, thank you. All right, now the test. And then I'm going to make some cream.
Left the fridge door open.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes I get a little too I Love Lucy with myself. Okay. All right. So this is going to be okay. People come up to me. I just finished a vegan baking boot camp, and people come from all over the world. And I know that in the beginning, and they say, well, when I left, all I ever hear is, did you test? Did you test? Did you test? There's 2 tests. One is to taste something. We, as vegans, don't have to worry about tasting raw anything. We don't have eggs. We don't have salmonella to worry about. So there's a taste test. How does it taste? And then there's the consistency test. Is this going to make a glaze? Is it thin enough to glaze? Is it going to be firm enough to make a truffle? So I'm just going to mush this up a little, and then we'll see about that. And put this back with my golf ball truffle in the fridge and make the cream. So I want to pull this out because otherwise I'll forget. Now I have to make a little bit of noise. So I just want to look and tell you. So I told you about the differences in the cocoa powder. To look for the correct percentage of chocolate. This is a coarse salt that you don't use to make a cake because it's not going to dissolve, and a fine salt. And then, you know, sometimes people say they want to use chocolate chips to make ganache, and I go, oh God, please don't. Chocolate chips are bake-resistant chocolate, so they're made not to melt. So of course they're going to melt if you get them over enough heat. But there's other stuff in here to keep them from melting. So it's not the most high-quality chocolate. What have I got here? I have baking chunks. I can't go into a store without buying chocolate. And so this is 70%, that's okay. These palais, they're called, is already, you know, you don't have to chop this, but I'm going to take a minute while you're tasting to show you how to chop. Now I'm going to keep this over here and make the, anybody have any questions? Look, there is no holy grail of sweetener. That's what I really need to tell you. So my thing is to make something really delicious based on what it is and serve a smaller portion of something that tastes delicious. Fill out the plate with a lot of fruit, and that's the way it goes. You know, in order to do a low fat, we were talking about this at dinner, or something that is legally allowed to be called low fat, no fat dessert, you have to use 5 times as much sugar. So, I mean, really, what have you gained? Nothing. Nothing. And your body is still looking for the fat. What is going on here is I have cashews that were soaked. If I don't have time to soak cashews for a period of time, I do a hot soak. So my friend Tal Ronan, and many of you probably know his name, he's a genius. Tal Ronan, Crossroads in LA, and lots of times says, don't soak raw cashews, they get sweet. Well, Tal's doing savory food and I'm doing desserts. By the way, I am a pretty good cook too, in terms of food. So I'm going to This was something I had to figure out this morning because this recipe calls for starting with 5 ounces, okay, of unsoaked, raw, unsalted, raw cashews. And the chefs here kindly soaked a lot. And so I didn't have off the top of my head exactly what the proportion was, but because I know what the consistency should be, I was able to figure this recipe out. When you make the full recipe that's in my cookbook, calls for using a little bit of agar powder. So agar is vegetarian jello, makes jello, and a little bit of gorgum, and I think gorgum is an amazing secret ingredient. It keeps vegan ice creams from getting icy. It thickens things. It doesn't need to be cooked. So then you get like a vanilla custard that can cut. You can make a tart. You're tasting a sauce. So I'm putting the soaked and drained cashews in here. 1 cup of, this is one of my most popular desserts, 1 cup of canned coconut milk. And then I will adjust it based on taste and consistency. And the only reason it will have to be adjusted is because I'm not positive about the, and I oftentimes put in lately to use it with the berries that you're using. I put in a little bit of, I put in some lemon zest, only if my lemons are organic, or lemon juice. And this other cream that I have here was done with, you can use coconut sugar here. This would be a place where you could use stevia, would be no problem at all. A little bit of salt. People say, oh, why are you using salt? I'm like, because I don't eat prepared food, so I can have a little salt to bring up the flavor. And this gets done really fast. If you're making the full recipe with the gorgum and the agar, this will heat to a boil, and the agar has to come to a boil. If you don't have a high-speed blender, put it in a saucepan, and that's that. So just bear with me for a minute here. And pretty much that's it. You see how fast that was? And then you can use vanilla extract, or you can use, I used vanilla bean. I scraped the bean out and put it in what you're tasting. But I don't throw away this precious vanilla bean. We use it to flavor things and so on. So that is that. And then I need to taste it, of course, and I've got my mother spoon and my tasting spoon because we want to be, see, it's not ready. It's not ready. So get to know, you really want to get to know what something is supposed to look like. It sounds pretty obvious, but it really is true. So it's just not smooth enough because I didn't want to make so much noise. 5 minutes? Whoa. All right. Here we go. I always put it on low to start. So this is that cream with chocolate. Let's see if this is smoother. This must be a brand new machine because all morning long I was going, there. Much smoother, right? There's no vanilla. Okay, let's see what happens here. So this truffle looks really nice to me. This all looks fine. I'm going to show you one or two other things. I have 5 minutes. Questions? Anybody have any questions? No questions? I mean, I will tell you that the sun here is in my eyes a little bit, but let's just see what I can do here. All right. What did you get? You got the cream and berries. Oh, this is another thing that you can do with the ganache. Life is not too short to stuff a raspberry. So, honestly, for relaxation, I'll make a little paper cornet or just a spoon sometimes. And, you know, people who avoid desserts, really, that's a raspberry with about a 1/16 of a teaspoon of ganache in here, and it's really good. And it gives you that hit of dessert, right? And then people go, what, did you go to Cordon Bleu? Have you studied with Julia Child? I mean, really, you put out a platter of these and people go crazy. But there's nothing to it. And then you put it on a plate that looks like this, and you are really good to go. Now, let's say you have some leftover chocolate around, because of course you have some leftover melted chocolate around, because why wouldn't you? And I have beautiful pictures in my book of this done right, but now I'm going to do it really fast to prove that you can do it fast. So, this recipe happened because when I was writing my book, where is the melted chocolate? Or you could do this with ganache. I had 300 pounds of chocolate in my house for a year. I had a lot of leftover chocolate much of the time, melted chocolate. So, it would be like this. I'd clean off the sides in the morning. I would put it properly like that and get it going again. But one day I had about 2 walnuts, 3 dried cranberries or something, and I was like, oh, right, in Paris they have these things that we call mendiant. It's a pretty fancy word for melted chocolate with stuff in it, stuff on it. And again, you make these ahead, you keep them in your freezer. They're gorgeous. They set up in the fridge in 2 seconds, any which way you want. And you've got a little dessert for when people stop by, or for when you're just nudgy, because look, we deserve it. We deserve it. As far as this idea that chocolate is really good for you, who's heard that? It's really good for you, right? I think it's good for you. Chocolate makes me happy. Happy is healthy. Great. But what I eat is, I live alone. This is the size of a typical salad bowl for me. I buy them in restaurant supply stores, and that's my dinner. I eat greens and beans and grains, and I eat really healthfully, and I crave that now. And unlike years ago when I worried about my weight and I couldn't have this around, I could never have this around. I would eat the whole thing. 300 pounds of chocolate in my house? Are you kidding? Gone. Ice cream, when the container is finished, then I'm full because there's no more left. Now I am in total balance. I think to think about chocolate as healthful, sure, there's flavanols and all. I mean, that's true. It's really true. But you would have to eat a lot. And chocolate usually comes with other things, like some sugar, at least. So it's not your best source. But feel free to do this. Feel free to do this, because this is part of life. By the time we get out of here, this mendiant will be ready. And I think I've used up my 5 minutes, but I don't care. I want to tell you something. When you measure dry ingredients, flour, sugar, cocoa powder, you need to whisk and then use the proper measuring ingredient. This is for dry, this is for liquid, this is a baby thing, but I use just enough fat. Fat, I said it, I use fat. Not in everything, but just enough. And then I overfill, so I call it whisk, dip, sweep, and then this wouldn't be the kind of sifter I would use, but I sift everything. Taking the time to do these things is going to give, using the right ingredients, using quality ingredients. You know, what you put in, you're going to get out. measuring carefully, reading the recipe all the way through. If something doesn't make sense, it isn't you. The writer made a mistake, you know? And if I don't do this right, there's going to be gold all over the counter, so I better not. But it's so nice. Robert? Is Robert around? So we have to go now. Oh, here we go. But wait till you see this. So this is called gold luster dust, and normal people like me buy it in a much, 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 much smaller size. And then you either, you get it dissolved in a little liquid, but you know, there's all kinds of things that you can do to do really beautiful food, and there you go. There's just nothing to it. Thank you very, very much for coming. Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much for